So I get the chance this morning to really set the theme of this conference and have the time to talk about what we mean by collaboration and resilience. And I'm going to be joined by a number of presenters this morning to help share their story, how they're doing it at the local level, how we're using technology to drive action. So I hope that this morning really frames the next 2 days for you. That's the intent, really, is to share a bit of that knowledge and understanding. I love that we tried something new this morning with the digital collaboration, the fact that we were able to share with each other a bit of who we are in a digital way, right? Who you're talking to, capture a photo, the location of where you're from, and then sharing that back in. That's different, right? That's evolution of what we're doing in the old way of just manually touching hands to a digital way of touching hands and sharing context and information. So we hope to continue that throughout the morning. So I want to start by just asking a question. I know there were quite a few first-time attenders, but how many of you were here last year at the summit with us in San Diego? Just a show of hands who was here last year. That's great. So welcome back for those of you that were with us last year. We introduced this concept of the new normal last year, and it really was about being prepared in the new normal. What does that mean? And so, that really is the foundation for everything we're talking about today. So what is the new normal, right? Just for that specific reason, what is it? Well, the new normal is the fact that all around us, things are changing and evolving faster and greater than ever before. That's tactics for terrorism. That is the size and scope and scale and the magnitude of the events that we've seen, from hurricanes to wildland fires and floods. And they seem to be getting faster, stronger, and more expensive than ever before. And I wish that I could stand up here today and say that even though 2017 was a really bad year when we kind of started the new normal conversation for 2018, and now here we are again and looking at 2019 and forward, that it's gotten better. And I would say that, looking at our colleagues at NOAA who kind of produce statistics on the year, right? How bad was it in monetary value and dollar value and event value for the United States? While it wasn't the worst year on record, it's definitely in the top 4 or 5, right? So the cost to us as citizens in the US, for those that live here, is about $91 billion last year. That's a lot of money. But the most important thing I take away from this, the second line there, that 80% of that $91 billion came from 3 events. Hurricanes, right? So think about the hurricanes impacting the eastern seaboard and down into Florida. That's a huge percentage of dollars coming from massive events that impacted our citizens and infrastructure. The third thing I took away from their statistics in the summary from last year was the third line, that $24 billion of that $91 billion was for wildfires. You're going to hear from some of our colleagues here in California who responded to wildfires last year and devastating wildfires in Butte County, and what it means for them and how they responded to that. $24 billion for wildfires. We're in California. We had the earthquake last night. Certainly wildfire season is upon us quickly. And then if you summarize all of that back, so looking at history of the new normal, certainly going back from 1980 to where we are at the end of 2018, $1.6 trillion has gone out to support disaster response recovery across the United States. A massive sum. So dollar amounts, we can say that while the numbers aren't the best, the highest it's ever been, it certainly continues onward. And if you look at the trend over the last several years, so this data set covers from 1970 all the way up to the end of 2018. It's from EMDAT and OFTA. So if you look at this data set, total reported disasters, just the trend line, just take away the trend line, not the anomalies of up and down a little bit at the end and saying, hey, it must be getting better because it wasn't the most expensive year on record in 2018. The trend line continues upward, and the fact that the number of disasters, the impact of the disasters continues up. That's the new normal we face. And as I was preparing for this conference and starting to put slides together, I couldn't help but just sit and ponder some of the anomalies that we were experiencing right now. From the last week alone, 5 feet of ice, snow, pellets landed in Guadalajara, Mexico. That's the picture on the top left corner of the slide. Unbelievable amount of visualization of what that really looks like, 5 feet. Certainly those that live in Southern California are interested in smog and the impact on humans, but the fact that the smog in the southern part of California is getting worse again. It's trending another direction. They're saying $14 billion to address this problem in Southern California alone. And then if you look at either side of the pond, so certainly in Alaska where it's over 80 degrees, where it's exacerbating the effects of wildfires, or if you look across to Paris, where you see the bottom right-hand corner, where it's 110 degrees and plus in Europe, heat waves are taking its toll on a number of factors, individuals, our infrastructure, the environment in general. So I was hoping as I started to stand up here for the new normal that I'd be able to tell you that, hey, it's getting better, right? We had an anomaly of a year, but I would say the trend line continues, and certainly these anomalies and these events are going to continue to take its toll on us. And so evidence tells us that the pace of change around us is accelerating. I would say that we, as an organization, all of us together, are at a place that we've never been before, right? These events that are taking its toll, the amount of money that we're having to put into our communities to both try to mitigate and reduce the risk, but also respond and recover when something happens is greater than ever before. How do we sustain that pace? And I would say the only way we do that is we need better understanding of what this really means to us as an environment, to our infrastructure, but also together how we can support these global challenges, these global impacts that we're experiencing. Because these events are not like they used to be. It's not that we take it on just by ourselves in our community. We need each other as partners to collaborate, to drive action and understanding if we're ever going to respond to this before. Now, this slide, for those of you who have attended the Esri User Conference in the past, is not new. In fact, this is a story that Jack has been telling for our owner of Esri for a number of years, raising the flag to say that things around us are accelerating like never before, that we have the onus to take on the responsibility of driving understanding and action and using GIS technology to do better, to help. There's evidence all around us that speaks to us. But it's not just an Esri thing. So back in January, the World Economic Forum, Secretary General Antonio Guterres from the United Nations was speaking, and I really was captivated by this sentence. I'm just going to read it for a moment because it's so important. And he said, I quote, "If I had to select one sentence to describe the state of the world, I would say that we're in a world in which global challenges are more and more integrated, and the responses are more and more fragmented. If this is not reversed, it's a recipe for disaster." Think about that. This isn't just us in the room. This is an anomaly that's occurring everywhere. It's going to take all of us to collectively work together, to collaborate, to understand what this new normal means, to develop actions and plans that can address things that we've never experienced before. It's not just Esri. It's not just us in this room. We have a responsibility with our expertise, and as the chief said, to take our collective knowledge, the qualitative and the historic knowledge that we have, apply it with science and data and evidence to drive forward with understanding that's new, that allows us to put things in place that can help mitigate the new normal. So that's our theme. That's why we are here. We're here to talk about collaboration, this new normal, and how we can start to collectively build resilience, not just for us in this room, but for each of the citizens that we serve, our neighbors in the next door, to our communities, to the nations that we work for, and globally for this planet that is struggling. So let's break this down. Let's start at the bottom of this and work our way through it. And I'm going to invite a few speakers to the stage as we go through these next two sections to really tell you their story about collaboration, resilience, and digital transformation, and how we think this world of GIS and technology can support this new normal. So let's just start with a baseline understanding of resilience. This is probably one of the most difficult terms when I have conversations, when I ask people, what do you mean by resilience? Could you tell me what you mean for being resilient? And I would say that it's different. If you have that conversation, it's just like GIS when you ask your grandparents at the table, and they say, what do you do? And you say, I do GIS. And they say, what does that mean? You say, I make maps, right? That answer can come from a lot of different formats. It's really difficult. Each of us have our own way of expressing what we do. And resilience in many ways can be the same problem. So I would say if you look at just the core, right? If you would Google and just search for resilience in the database, where Merriam-Webster says, simply it's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, a toughness. So think about that for just a moment, resilience. What does it mean to you to recover from difficulties? What does difficulties mean? So just take a moment, think about that in your mind, with your experiences, your historic knowledge, your understanding of the events that you've covered and support. Tell me what that means. Just think about that for a minute. Now, I suspect, knowing who you are and the audience that we have here globally and across all these different sectors, that you probably thought of something maybe like a cyber attack or a terrorist activity that you're responding to, or mitigating what's happening at a border. Or you may be thinking back to those massive disasters that I kind of referenced, thinking of hurricanes that impacted us here in the US or in the Caribbean. You may be thinking about floods. These aren't wrong answers, right? These are In fact, global issues. Think about flooding. It's a universal problem and it's getting worse. You heard me last year, for those that were with us, talk about my life. I live in Houston, Texas. It's the flood capital of the world, I like to say, because it seems like every time it rains, it floods. It's a problem that continues and it's getting worse for us. You may have thought about wildfires. So certainly we're in California, so wildfires may be on the top of mind. You may have thought about an earthquake because you experienced it last night. I tell you, we were on the stage and Russ alluded to the overhead structures. This place was rocking and rolling last night with the speakers. So none of those answers are wrong, right? Those acute shocks, the things that sever our normal life, are so important, right? It's what we plan for, it's what we prepare for, it's how we work to respond to make our citizens safe when this actually happens. These aren't wrong answers, right? Resilience is our ability to withstand these punches, right? These shocks that happen and sever the normal life of everyday business in our communities. But how many of you thought about something different? How many of you thought about things like homelessness? Or you thought about the aging infrastructure in your city? Again, I'm in Houston. It seems like we're under construction nonstop because we're trying to build infrastructure that's aging and weathering to try to mitigate the growth of the urban process that we have around us so that we can reduce the flood problem. It's ongoing. It never stops, it seems like. Or how many of you thought about access to food and water, these chronic issues that occur? This picture was from just last week in India, where 600 million people are at risk of acute water shortage right now as a result of weather, environment, climate change. These aren't wrong answers either. These chronic stresses, right, the underlying things that are occurring around us in our communities are only exacerbated when those acute shocks, the earthquake, the flood, the fire happen. So I would say that for us to be resilient, I want to set a definition that's better than just saying, not just getting through the difficult moment of that shock and a toughness for it. I would say that what we should think about is a way to address resilience more holistically. So the Rockefeller Foundation has a program called the 100 Resilient Cities. Many of you have heard about it. You probably live in cities that are taking advantage of this programmatically through a resilience officer and funding. But they pronounce it this way. So resilience is the capacity of individuals, us as citizens in our community, but also our neighbors, our communities at large, the institutions we work for, the systems we rely on to do business every day, those mission-critical systems, to withstand, adapt, no matter what type of shock, like the earthquake or the flood or the fire that comes through, but also the stresses that are underneath that, the homelessness problem, the demographic shifts in population, displaced persons in our communities, aging infrastructure and the like. No matter what we experience, we should be able to withstand that, address it, and move forward. So I would like to put this out there as the way we're going to talk about resilience today. We're going to look at how we intersect acute shocks and chronic stresses in our community and take a more holistic view of how those things interact to develop a better baseline understanding of this new normal and how we can start to really move forward as an organization. That echoes what we've seen. So I've got a global theme kind of developing. I don't want to say it's just Sonoma, but in fact, this quote from Margareta Wallström, who is the representative to the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction at the UN, made this statement recently, and it says, "Access to information is critical to successful disaster risk management. You cannot manage what you cannot measure." I love that. That's why we're here. That's why we do what we do. And so I want to talk about that for a minute. I want to think about, we've kind of set the framework of resilience, what that means. We understand the new normal. Let's talk about how we measure and the process by why we do that. Let's set a baseline together about how we move forward in this new normal. So I want to tell you a bit of story. So my wife is a great jigsaw puzzler. She loves them. She loves to dump the big cardboard box out on the table and get buried in the pieces of jigsaw puzzles. And her methodology, the way that she works through a puzzle, which is fascinating to me because she's very fast at what she does, and she's always beats me if we have a race to see who can start working through the puzzle, is that she immediately starts to aggregate like colors and pieces together. She doesn't work around the edges to get the frame, which is my methodology, by the way. I like to start at the edge and try to find the corners, and I work my way back to the center. She throws that out, right? She starts at the middle, and she looks for like-minded things. She's a geographer, right? So maybe she's using Tobler's first law, like things that are closer together or more related. So she's looking for colors that are alike and starting to build her way out to the frame. But she beats me, right? Because she starts to build this pattern out just by seeing things that are like together based on color and little characteristics of what she sees visually inside of those puzzle pieces. Me, I'm starting at the framework, trying to find the edge of the problem and work my way back in. But together, when we sit down at the table and we start working on a puzzle, we're actually really good. Because what happens, right? I'm framing the problem on the outside. She's in the middle, building outwards, we meet at the edges. And when we do it right and we do it well, we're really fast. And we work together and we collaborate to put the puzzle together. Now, we have different approaches to how we would build it. If I were to sit down and start from scratch, she would still beat me, number one. Number two is that I would still be working the edges and try to work my way back in. But I've learned from her, right? I learned that there are ways when I get stuck in a problem that I can always start to look for like-minded pieces and start to work my way in a small piece of the problem until I can pick up the pattern and continue out again. And I would say that that's what we need, right? We need different methodologies, different approaches to how we solve problems. And if we do it together, we're actually much better off. Well, the good thing is that here we have something to look to as a process, a framework by which we can all collaboratively work on the jigsaw puzzle of the new normal together. Now, the science of where, you've heard that from Esri for a number of years. It really is the science of geography and the marrying of that with the technology of GIS to really put this process together. It allows us to measure and analyze data, right? Foot stomping what you just heard from Shirley on that point. If we don't know how to measure and we don't know what we're looking at, we're never going to understand the problem holistically. So we need a way to measure and analyze and develop understanding of this new normal, because our historic knowledge, just as Shirley said for her, they had been through floods before, they had been through wildfires before, earthquakes, but it wasn't the same. The Russian River didn't flood the same way it did last time. For me, last year, as you heard, in Houston, Hurricane Harvey was not like we had been through before from a hurricane perspective. It was more rain and it was different. So we need ways to frame better understanding of this new problem. The data that we're collecting and analyzing and measuring, we can start to understand and open our minds to what this new normal presents in front of us. And if we do that, then we can collaboratively work on problem solving. We can understand and iterate on ways that we can make this better and put processes in place to act upon what we see. And so I would propose that that framework, the science of where, really is the process that we want to go through to build resilience for individuals, for our communities individually, and for the world. We're going to start to visualize and analyze the shocks, the earthquakes, the floods, and the fires, and the stressors like homelessness and aging infrastructure, and how they start to work together. We can't do that independently anymore. We have to bring those together to get a true picture of what it means. And if we understand how they connect, then we can start to build plans that iterate collaboratively on it. So we can bring our teams together collaboratively, work on those plans, make changes on the fly based on what we're seeing sequentially in that process. And then we can agree that this is what success is going to look like for us. It's a shared understanding of the problem, the plan to attack it, and what success looks like that we can measure ourselves collectively against. And by the way, we can also do this inclusively with our citizens, with our neighbors, to engage them in the process, just like Shirley laid out. They use story maps to tell the story, the historic problem that they experienced, but also resources that are available now to help the recovery, and also how to prepare in the future, and why they're making policy changes at the county level that affects building codes and everything else. That holistic problem solving, that framework, is how we build resilience for individuals, our communities that we work within, our organizations, and the nations that we serve. So how do we take that to scale, right? We're in a room today. We're going to go back home to our offices, and we're going to start working. Some of you working as a team of one, some of you working as a team of many. I would say that what we have in front of us is geospatial infrastructure that connects us all together. It's not just about shaking hands today. It's just like we did this morning. We started a digital conversation with each other to meet each other digitally, who you are, where you're from geographically, take a photo, share a bit about yourself. Well, that geospatial infrastructure that allowed us to do that survey together this morning persists around the world and connects all of us together as one ecosystem, a nervous system of the planet. So that no matter where you sit when you go home, you're connected to the people in this room, and you're connected to a whole world of other individuals out there with their holistic understanding and their knowledge and their background that can help you. So what is geospatial infrastructure? Well, it's simply GIS at scale. It's what we've been doing at a whole new level, right? It's accessing content that lets us frame the problem like never before. That's sharing and collaborating on information so that we can begin to measure what we don't know, right? It's also about applying mapping and analytics. So I can build a model. I can say, this is how I see the problem unfolding and how I'm planning to maybe work against that. And I can share that back out collaboratively for others to take input on and work against that model to visualize it, to produce analytic products that are more holistically wrapped. And it's about integrating all of that content, that model, the analysis, the output into the systems that you rely on every day to make better decisions, to change policy, to change direction in this new normal to help build resilience. That's what it takes. This global geospatial infrastructure is the platform that we can share and collaborate around. We can solve problems more holistically if we work together and we develop this shared understanding. So what powers that? There's a change at hand. For many of you that have been at our conferences before, you've heard Jack talk about WebGIS. It is leveraging the power of web services to connect us together, right? It is what fuels the system. Just like the internet runs, WebGIS runs on top of that nervous system. It allows us to connect not just you as individuals, but you with your teams within organizations, and eventually organizations together in a systems of systems approach to really solve the problems in a new way. But why is that so compelling? Not just it's an evolution of computing and technology and GIS in general. Why is it so compelling? Well, I would say that because, number one, it just made everything that we did as GIS professionals more accessible to everyone in the organization. Decision makers, policy directives, elected officials, your boss, who needs access to the information and understanding that you can produce as a GIS professional to drive change and understanding. WebGIS makes that possible. It's easier to push that forward because it brings forward not just the content, but also then the web maps that we use to wrap in applications that allow people at the edge to interact and understand in real time what we're seeing. So if you think about WebGIS and making it compelling and why this is so important for us, is that it takes everything that you do, it adds more powerful communication and collaboration components to it, and it gives us a whole new way to build a global geospatial infrastructure at scale. And I would argue that there's no stopping this, right? We have to move forward. The new normal puts us in the place where we are up against the wall, where we need to work together. And a global infrastructure is the way we're gonna have to do that. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, that's a great vision. I'm a team of one and I've got to go back home and I'm struggling with the next project on my plate. I would say great, because WebGIS works for you as an individual, supporting that project that you're doing right now. And it may seem small to you in the global scale, but it's just as important as your neighbor who's working on a nationwide problem for border security, right? So this WebGIS pattern supports you individually on a project. It supports your system for your organization to start share and collaborate together as a small team or as an organization to store data officially, to exploit it geographically, and to push it out to make decisions better. And it also then supports those that are working at a national scale and global scale by connecting a system of systems, all of us working together, integrating data in real time to make better decisions. So don't take this process and don't take this vision as something big and out of reach for you. This applies to every single one of us in the room. We have a way to do this today. And when this happens, no matter if you're that team of one or you're the team of 100, and you start implementing WebGIS and this pattern and exposing the ease of use of access and these applications that expose the technology at the edge to your decision makers, it will change the way you do business. This is how we make digital transformation in each of our organizations and around the world. It connects us together, it makes it easy, and the most important thing that this changes over time is that we're not working just sequentially on a problem anymore, where I take my piece of the puzzle, I do something and I stop and then I have to wait on somebody else. No, we're talking about integrating and simultaneously working on a problem together. And think about the new normal again, coming back to that theme. Things are faster, more deadly, more destructive than ever. We can't wait on sequential processes anymore. We need to shift the way we do business to more integrated, simultaneous processing and understanding, to be proactive, not reactive when something starts to form and we see that start to be discovered.